Voilà. So up to now, this section where we try to look at the influence of information technology to your business models with a specific focus on e-commerce. So what we have done up to now is we took a look at Porter's 5 forces model, where we said, okay, we have the 5 forces, you already know them, and based on the usage of IT systems, we can actually influence them a little bit. We can try to cope with those forces, such as going for automation and go for cost leadership, such as making more close connections with your customers or your suppliers, such as going for product differentiation, adding products or services to your products or services. These kind of things which help you to cope in that industry landscape with the typical 5 forces. Then we went for 2 other well-known theories and concepts within organizational studies and management theory. So we set a transaction cost theory, which says that you have certain transaction costs associated with being active in the market, to look up a supplier, to have the negotiations and whatever. This theory, these costs normally force companies to become bigger because then they have to do less transactions and the costs of the transactions become lower. But we saw through the use of IT, those costs can be lowered. And so that pressure for organizations to become bigger is less pertinent, less prominent. And then we saw with the agency theory, actually, something similar yet opposite, in the sense that the agency theory says, well, we have lots of people working in an organization. They all have their own interests, their own motivations, which do not necessarily coincide with what we as a manager, as an organization want. So we need to manage those people. That comes with a cost, and that cost typically increases when the firm size goes up. So that theory, that concept motivates organizations to remain small and not to grow, because then the management costs do go up. Nevertheless, also there we saw, well, if we use information technology, it can lower our agency costs, therefore also weakening that force that you would expect from the perspective of the agency theory. That part was kind of a supplement to the e-business consequences of IT to your organization. And to conclude that, we said, well, if you look at enterprise IT, if you look through the history of time, you saw that more and more integration happened between within organizations and then later outside organizations, up to the point that we make connections with suppliers and customers. And if you go far enough, that's actually the reason or the logical trend of e-commerce that we're seeing today. We discussed some of those properties: omnipresence, worldwide reach, universal standards. Okay, so now the information richness, interactivity, and information density. And to conclude, personalization and user-generated content. Based on all those properties, we can actually say, well, nowadays we have what's called a digital marketplace. With all those characteristics, we create a marketplace that's different than the traditional physical marketplace, the digital marketplace. And in terms of costs, or in terms of properties of that market, some important conclusions can be drawn. First of all, we see that in those markets, there is much less information asymmetry. Any one of you aware what's information asymmetry and what does it mean in economics? It's a very well-known concept as well in economics. What does it mean? Ever sold or bought a second-hand car? It's a typical situation of what's called a lemon market. A lemon market is a situation where there's a lot of information asymmetry, meaning asymmetric, unequal information between the parties involved in transaction in a market. Typically happen when you are selling a second-hand car. I'm not a car expert. I don't know too much about the car. I can drive a car, but I'm not a car expert. So I don't know a lot about the engine and its properties and how to inspect a car, whether it's in a good quality or a bad quality. There are usually only a few people, a small percentage of people who are quite good at that. And if you want to buy a car and a second-hand car, that car has a history. things might have happened with that car. There might be some damage which happened, but they try to hide it for you. There might have other things that already, some parts might already been replaced and so on. And in order to really judge, is this car worth the price that the seller is asking me, you need to have some knowledge. And unless you are a car expert who's able to judge a car based on the things that you see, that's very difficult. And so that's often why they say it's a lemon market. It's a market with a lot of information asymmetry, because the seller has much more information than the buyer. The buyer really needs to trust the seller that he or she is giving all the information that is relevant for you to judge the product. A typical market where you see asymmetry. What we see in a digital marketplace, and of course in a car it always remains asymmetric, but in a digital marketplace we see that it's much easier for you as a buyer to look up information on that product. Not so much in the second-hand market, but on the first-hand market there's also often a lot of information asymmetry. You go to a shop and by coincidence, the guy who's selling you the product, by coincidence, they always have that product at home and it's brilliant. It works perfect. Well, the only way to judge it is to see to which extent can you trust the seller, yes or no. In e-commerce markets, there is much less of that asymmetry because you can look it up yourself. You can try to look for reviews. You can try to look for reviews on the shop, on the e-commerce platform that you're using. You could if it's a platform bringing together buyers and sellers, you could also look at the reviews of that specific buyer. You could look up reviews of that particular product that you're buying, the brand, the edition. So you can get much, much more information on the product or service that you're going to buy as a buyer than in non-e-commerce markets. And so this is really a fundamental consequence of the usage of e-commerce markets and the creation of digital marketplaces, that information asymmetry drastically increases. A second consequence is that you have much lower search costs. And there I think it's very much intuitive. I think most of you understand what it means. It means that it's much, much easier to look for products, to look for services, because anything that you or all that you need is a PC or a smartphone or a tablet, a device with internet connection, and you can access those apps or those websites. What's even more interesting is that it's much easier, much less costly to not just consult one product or service, but to compare many of them. If you want to buy a certain product, you want to buy a vacuum cleaner, well, in a non-e-commerce market and you need to visit several shops, it might take you a few hours to go to the different shops in your city who might offer you a vacuum cleaner. In an e-commerce market, the search costs are much less. In a few minutes, you can visit 5, 6, or 10 shops who offer similar products, and you can start comparing. You can start comparing the price, the quality, previous reactions from other customers, and so on. That's very much similar to the transaction cost. The search cost is really like only the searching, exploring the market. Is this an interesting product? Is this something I would like to buy? Does it look nice? Does it fit my needs? Transaction costs are the costs actually associated with doing transactions. So when you're really going to buy something, also there the costs are much lower. You even do not need to leave your couch. You can just do it on your couch. You take a laptop, you browse to the website, you place the order, and they might even deliver it at your place. So we see that information asymmetry declines, search cost declines, transaction cost declines, all things in the benefit of the buyer. But also for the seller, there are some advantages, like menu costs. Recall what I just said before about this Black Friday that's upcoming. A lot of promotional activities happen. Well, if you go to a real retailer and want to have a change in prices, for them, often it's a nightmare. You still see it often in clothing stores when they want to do some promotion. They start with stickers or any kind of other system, or they need to change the labels, the price tags to all those products. If you want to sell a lot, it's also a lot of work because you need to select the products to which a promotion is applicable. You need to make sure that you do not make mistakes. You need to control it, to scan it when people go to the counter. You also need to remove them when the promotion offer is over. In digital environments with e-commerce, it's much, much easier. You can just select and browse and say to all these products, we apply these promotions for this amount of time. So you can, yeah, it's easier to adapt your prices, much, much easier. Not only for a certain promotion, you could also go for price differentiation and dynamic pricing. Price differentiation, yeah, again, maybe you actually already don't. What does it mean, price differentiation? It's much easier to do on e-commerce than often in real life. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Exactly. Exactly. So the holy grail of a good seller is they will always ask you for information. A good salesman will never talk and talk and talk like I do. No, they will ask you questions, and based on your questions, they will try to get your willingness to pay, and they will give you a price that, oh coincidence, is exactly the max amount of money that you wanted to pay for that product. It's very difficult in the real life market because you really need a sales guy or when to do that, and they need to invest a lot of time. In e-commerce markets, you can do it in a much more sophisticated way. There have been situations where, and it's prohibited, but it happened in the past, and maybe it still happens today, I don't know. There have been situations where certain companies said, well, guys, we know that people with normal PCs versus people using a Mac, they are different people. Now it has changed a little bit, but it used to be the case that Macs were much more expensive than normal PCs. And Apple also had this whole marketing story about it, that they were better, but because they were better, they were also worth a higher price and whatever. So some companies said, well, that's interesting to know, because we know that Mac users, Apple users, they tend to spend more on their laptops. So probably they are also willing to spend a little bit more when they're booking a travel. So what they did was on their website, they said, okay, let's just see which kind of device this person is using. If you're using an Apple, then, well, we will provide you the same product, but we will charge you a little bit more. And if you have a Windows device, we will charge you a little bit less, based on cookies, based on your country that you're browsing from or whatever. These kind of things are much easier to do than in non-e-commerce situations. Of course, you normally as a customer, you're not aware of it, but these possibilities, technically, they are there. But of course, you need to operate within the limits of what is legally allowed. It's also the same with dynamic prices. Typically known in the airline industry, where the chances that the person next to you has paid the same price as you is very, very low. Even if you're in the same product category, even if you're flying all economy, the prices will be different. Why? Because the prices have a dynamic price model. They will be different throughout time. So in the beginning, maybe the prices are very low. Then after a while, they increase until just a few hours before departure, and they'll drop again. Again, this is much easier to do if you have a digital platform where you can, on the spot, 24/7, you can look for tickets and you can book them, and the algorithm take care of the dynamic pricing. If you go to a normal retailer, well, the prices will not be fixed. If you go to Amazon or to Bol or whatever, it might be that the same product that you buy today might have a different price tomorrow and yet another price the day after. In traditional shops, the costs of switching those prices are much higher. You see that some companies, they also try to find some tricks way around it. In Belgium retail market, you see that Colruyt, for instance, they do not put real tags anymore on products, paper tags. No, they have these digital screens that they put in their shopping furniture. So they already, again, try to use technology to have lower menu costs where they can online or on the fly, actually, I should say, they can adapt their prices. But again, it's a fundamental consequence of doing e-commerce that those menu costs are much lower. Switching costs, I've put a question mark after it, behind it. Do you think switching costs increase or decrease by using e-commerce? Actually, I already revealed it a little bit in the beginning, but let's see. Increase, yes. Why? Decrease. Okay, why do the... Yes. Indeed. Yes. Yes. Yeah, and even within B2C or B2B or whatever the kind of market that you're addressing, even there it could depend on the case. We see sometimes cases where the switching costs are much lower because the competitive platform is just one click away. Again, that's kind of the language that they use in these environments. You need to react quickly. It needs to be easy findable. It needs to be clear, and you need to make sure that the customer quickly makes a sale because the customer is only one click away. It's very easy for the customer to open another tab on the browser and to go to another shop. On the other hand, if you have good loyalty programs, if you make sure that your website is super user-friendly, to make sure that they really know your needs, that they personalize the message, and that they propose something to you which is very, very appealing before you have the time or the idea to go to another platform, then actually you increase the switching cost. So indeed, very good answer. It really depends on the situation. And so all these things are, usually for customers, this is considered as a very big advantage. For sellers, this is typically considered as an advantage. Customers, typically, they don't realize. Switching costs depend. A typical drawback, both for sellers and buyers, is the time between the sale and the usage. It's well known within marketing that one way to lure in customers is to make sure that they have immediate gratification. They see something when they're going at the retailer, and at the counter they see a small package, and they suddenly become hungry, and they take it, and they pay, and they can immediately eat that little thing that they bought. Online, that's a drawback. It's really that from all the advantages that we see above, this delayed timing or this longer time between the sale and the usage is a significant drawback. That's also probably the reason why we see so many experiments these days with companies trying to close that gap, to really have this very quick delay, not just within 2 days, within 1 day, the same day, and even within the same hour. There have been some initiatives in Belgium, there have been some initiatives in Antwerp. Often after a few weeks or months, they fail because it's super expensive to have this immediate delivery systems set up. But you see that this is like one of the main disadvantages that companies realize, that customers realize, and so of course that they try to solve in one way or other, and still not solved at this point. And then a final consequence of this. The significant consequence of this digital marketplace is that we have possibilities for disintermediation and re-intermediation. Disintermediation is the phenomenon where we already discussed about the supply chain earlier. You have different players in a supply chain, suppliers and the suppliers of the suppliers and so on, and also with customers, you have the customers of the customers and so on. And often when you have a product, the product is not just created by one company. There are different companies who all add value, and then it actually arrives with the end customer. Disintermediation is the phenomenon that you see here. So normally you have different players in the market. You start with the producer, the wholesaler, the retailer, consumer, and actually even the producer has suppliers before it. And what happens in disintermediation is that you basically try to eliminate one of them or multiple of them from the supply chain. So the producer says, well, we are not going to sell anymore to the wholesaler. We're going to directly make our sale to the retailer, or even better, we're going to directly make the sale to the consumer. That's possible with e-commerce because you could create an app, you could create a platform, a website, where basically the consumer is able to directly consult the website of the producer and can therefore avoid the wholesaler and the retailer. What's the big advantage? Well, each of those players within a supply chain, they're economic operators. So they add value, which is indeed what they do. And for that value, they want to be remunerated. They want to get a little bit of money, and ideally they want to have a profit. So if you're able to skip some of those actors within the supply chain, Well, what you could do is you could drop the price because you don't need to pay for those intermediate parties in the supply chain. And at the same time, hopefully, that producer might even hope that, yeah, it can drop the price, but it can maybe also increase its profit. Because the costs of creating the product in this case might be 15. And of course, I mean, here it might be 15, but you need to add some products here, and maybe only here there's only a profit of 15, and they sell it for 20, and then in this part of the supply chain it gets to 45 and then 50. So the profit here is only 5. But if here the producer's costs are still 15, but they can sell it for 22, the price for the customer goes down, but even the profitability for the producer goes up because they still produce at 15 euros a unit, so they make 7 euros profit instead of only 5. So again, that's a fundamental consequence of these markets where producers have the possibility to skip some of those players. What are some markets where we saw this very clearly? What are some industries where we see that nowadays producers, they go directly to the consumers often, and then they avoid certain players in the the downstream supply chain? Sorry? Clothes, yes. You could buy your Levi's now directly from Levi's and not from the retailer. Yes, but do you actually buy your groceries directly from the farm? That's very nice to hear. I've never done that up to now. Well, okay. Well, I've never ordered milk from a specific cow, but in theory you could do. One of the industries where we saw this initially happening and where it still happened, we saw it, for instance, a lot in the traveling industry, which was typically an industry where people, they needed to go to a traveling agency, and the agency had the power basically to guide you through your journey. They said, this is a brilliant location, sir, and these are the hotels, and these are, brilliant hotel and whatever. Actually, they were, of course, often suggesting those hotels on which they had a big margin or with whom they had a good contact and a good contract. Now you see that often airplane tickets, you can buy them directly from the company who's actually providing the flights. You could directly book a hotel at the company who's actually offering the hotel room. And okay, maybe before you could still call the hotel or write a letter or an email or whatever, but still quite clumsy and complex. This is a typical industry where we saw that okay, producers went directly to consumers. Of course, it has a drawback in the sense that if anything goes wrong during your travel, you need to solve it yourself. But we saw indeed prices going down significantly, and for some of those producers of the service, their profits went up. But then we also sometimes see the opposite direction. It also means that if you need to, or if you want to skip some of those steps, your world as a consumer also becomes a little bit more complex, because now suddenly, whereas you could go to a retailer where all the products were there and you just went through the shop and you picked the products that you wanted, all the products were there. If you really go to the producer yourself, it means that if you need different products, different types of products, you also need to consult those different producers. And it's not just a one-stop experience anymore. You need to go to producer A for that product, to producer B for that product, and so on. So what we see was that as a reaction to that increased complexity, there was also a little bit of re-intermediation. Yeah? So while some players were pushed out of the market, people also saw, well, this offers us an opportunity to regain a new intermediate place in the market, in that supply chain. And also there in traveling agencies, we saw that happening. We saw these price comparison websites, those review sites. So they were not the same as a traveling agency. They were not really guiding you and supporting you and offering you an insurance and so on. No, they just offered you an opportunity to deal with that additional complexity caused by disintermediation. So they aggregated all the information, they made sure that you could compare them and so on. And that can really shake up a market. That's also why I made the link to the digital transformation, as we saw in the first session. It's not just doing the same digitally. It really impacts the structure of an industry, and it really changes the business models of the players or the operators in that industry. Yeah. And so often, again, we see several phases. In the first phase, that some intermediaries are eliminated, and then some other intermediaries, often providing another way of working or another other function, come in. Yeah. Now, before we go to some case studies and some examples within specific industries, I just want to give you again. We are in a course which should be supported by academic theory and so on. So with some classifications where we will look at some different marketplace positions that you can have in that market, at some revenue models and some commercial models. And once we have an overview of those different types of way of acting in that industry, we will look at some specific examples and some good examples and some less good examples. So what kind of position can you take in such a marketplace? The first one is, for instance, that you could just be, as before, the manufacturer or the primary service provider. You are the one who manufactures clothes. You are the one who manufactures laptops. You are the one who really creates products that people use and consume. And you could say, well, we position ourselves in that e-commerce market as the manufacturer, as a service provider. We are going directly to sell it via an online channel to our customers. Could be physical products, could be videos, media, services, you name it. You could directly enter into the market and say, this is us, this is the product or service that we provide, and you can buy it directly at our place, our website, or our app. What you saw is that also online resellers and retailers arose. So what they do is basically as a normal retailer, but then online. So they provide you a more one-stop shop feeling, where a lot of products are gathered, different products are gathered, often physically, and they are offered to you through an online channel, but it's the online reseller, online retailer who will actually buy the products first and then resell it to you. This is how Amazon started. They said, well, we are going to sell books. And what we do is we buy a lot of books, we store them in our warehouses, and we buy them from a lot of suppliers, a lot of niche market players. But we make sure that we have all of them. And then when the customer orders them, we will resell them, of course, at a little markup. Later on, they shifted more and more to the third marketplace position that you can have, to an online marketplace, where they said, well, we're not going to buy everything ourselves because that's very complex, it's very costly. You need also to have very big warehouses, logistically speaking, it's very, very complex. Once you have a very big audience, once you have a lot of customers, and once you're well known, it was possible for them to say, well, maybe we should not buy everything ourselves first. Maybe we can just be an online marketplace where we bring together the two sides of the market. We have the suppliers and we have the customers, and they come to our place, our website, and the person who wants to sell their product, their book or whatever, they can make a post or an advertisement or whatever on our platform. And the consumers, they can't come to our platform to actually look for it. And what we as an online marketplace do is just putting those two sides of the market together. And of course, every transaction that happens with it, we will again add a small markup. But then the value is not as such that you buy and then you resell, but you offer the marketplace, you offer the forum for people who want to do a transaction to find their counterpart and their product there. Can be in a very direct way that you actually see that you're buying from someone, or some of those marketplaces, they also really hide it a little bit. You have the impression that you buy from Bol, you have the impression that you buy from Amazon, but actually it's someone else providing the product to you. But it's easier for you if it's all just one integrated process. It can be business to business, business to consumer, consumer to consumer. I've listed some of them here. I mean, the business to consumer, most of you already know them. Consumer to consumer as well. But there are also a lot of those platforms in a B2B platform. Alibaba, for instance, is very dominant on that area as well. And needless to say, of course, these days you can have it in different. You can access those platforms via different mediums, wired, wireless, mobile, and so on. Now that distinction, business to business, business to consumer, business consumer to consumer, is well known. Actually, we can really make it more general, more extensive. So in e-commerce markets, often they say, well, you have consumers, you have business, and you have government, and all of them can do business with all of them. So then you do not just end up with 3 combinations, you actually end up with 9 combinations. You can have government to government, you can have government to business, you can have consumer to government, and so on. So all those combinations actually exist, and there exist marketplaces for each of those 9 combinations. Some are more easier to find than others, but it might be interesting to look up a little bit. Could you, for instance, find an example for all of them? Because some of them are very easy to find, some of them are a bit more difficult to find. What we also see as a nuance in these online marketplaces is that you also can make a difference in the emphasis or in the lead or the ownership of those marketplaces. Certainly in B2B markets, you see that sometimes that market is dominated at the sell side. So it's the seller who dominates, or the supplier provides his products on some kind of a platform to many buyers. You can have it being dominated via the buyer. So the buyer has the platform, and the consumers. The buyer has the platform, and the providers, the suppliers, they can come and they can visit the website. Procurement websites, for instance, are a typical example that a big company or a big government, they set up their own platform and they say, we need this kind of product in these quantities for this maximum price. And then a lot of potential suppliers, they might come and visit the website and actually do an offer. Or you can have more neutral exchanges where you really have an intermediate website, which is not really owned by the suppliers, not really owned by the customers, but is more neutral and just brings together those 2 parts. So we have manufacturers that make their e-commerce platform, we have online resellers, and then we have online marketplaces. In those 9 configurations, from business, consumer, and government parts, and we have those different alternatives which party is dominating the platform, or is it more neutral. I've included some screenshots of some B2B marketplaces because they might be less known, but you can take a look at it in the slides at home. Another position that you could take is more of a transaction or information broker. I already talked about this traveling industry where we saw there happened some disintermediation. Benefit is lower prices, higher profit, but people are a bit overwhelmed with all the information that they have. That's the typical opportunity for an information or transaction broker to step in, because they say there's a lot of complexity. It's not easy for customers to do business anymore. So what they will provide is they will integrate services and information, aggregate information, and they will provide it in a very easily accessible way to you. And that's why I mentioned that the critical point here is user friendliness, because if you want to position yourself as an information or transaction broker, your added value is to reduce the complexity for the consumer. So that means that you need to be very user friendly and to make that information available in a way which is as easy consumable as possible. For instance, again, if you're looking for a vacuum cleaner and you want to have the cheapest offer, one way to do it is to type it in on Google and visit the different sites separately, or you might be lucky and at the top part of your screen might already show it to you, or there might be some websites who actually do the comparison for you, and you might say, this is the maximum price I'm willing to pay, this is maybe the 3 or 4 brands that I want to choose from, and these are the properties that I want the vacuum cleaner to have, with a battery or not a battery, offering, whatever. And then based on that, you get a nice overview of which products are suitable and which are the providers or the sites that might offer you that product and for which sites. Yeah. What they will do is, of course, they will often then allow you the functionality to just click and then make the transaction, and then they often make, of course, a small fee on that. And then lastly, something that is more and more declining as the years go by, but there's still a possibility then to create what's then called a portal. A portal is what Yahoo became famous for, and what they were well known for is that some of those portals, they try to be the first point of access when someone is actually entering the internet. So when you're looking for specific content, they were then often called super sites. Nowadays, except for very niche topics, they don't really exist anymore. They're not so popular anymore. One might argue that a lot of social networks have taken over this position. Now you see that the first point of access that people have on the internet is often their Facebook or their Instagram or their TikTok. So those portals, they do not really exist so much anymore, but we often see that social media actually takes over the role and wants to liaise, connect you to, for instance, interesting offers. And then, of course, they also get a little bit of a fee for that. Yeah. That's the first thing. If you want to analyze that market with all its properties that we discussed, you have marketplace positions. Direct production, product offering, brokers, marketplaces, and so on. A second thing to distinct several of those players, or the different ways on how they can act, is their revenue model. Revenue model is actually about how do you make money? Where do you get your revenue stream from? A first very obvious one is just to have a direct sale of your product or service. If you make a product or a service and you can sell it, well, that's how you make money. We do see that e-commerce offers some new ways to offer that product or service, because you could, just as before, you could just ship it. You could just send a book or a DVD or whatever. What we also see is that, for instance, in the media industry, we have possibilities to have a pay-per-view. You can watch this amount of movies, or you can watch this amount of time, and you have a subscription to a streaming service. Well, you still directly sell your product, but the way how you gather your revenue is still a little bit different. And that's what we see here. You have a lot of those subscription models which arrived with the introduction of e-commerce. Of course, you also have a lot of parties who basically get their income from advertisement. A lot of those social media platforms that I just mentioned, a lot of the search engines like Google and Bing, they get most of their revenues, they get it from advertisement. Exists in the non-e-commerce market, but of course is much more fine-tuned and can be much more advanced in an e-commerce setting. It used to be the case that there were a lot of banner ads and pop-ups. Now it's more hidden and more integrated into the user experience. When you open or when you watch a certain movie on YouTube, it might be that first you get some kind of a commercial before you can actually see the movie that you wanted. Or when you're scrolling towards social media, you might see a lot of posts from your friends, and then suddenly you can get a commercial offer in between. Also here, quite advanced revenue models have risen. You have the cost per mil, or the CPM, the typical way where basically you as a platform, you charge your advertiser per 1,000 times that the item that they want to show, the message that they want to spread, is seen by people on the platform. So it depends on how many times that someone or that customers actually see what's there on the platform. You have a cost per click model where you actually charge the advertiser per amount of times that your advertisement is being clicked. Or you have models where you have the cost per acquisition, where you show it, people click, and then when they actually make the acquisition, when they actually do a transaction, they buy a product or service, that then you charge your advertiser. Or what we also often see, sponsorship. Now we see a lot of influencers basically advertising products or services by means of linking their name, their reputation to that product or service. Resellers and brokers, what they often do is they go for the commission per transaction, which is also similar to the cost per transaction in advertising models. Or again, these might be very, very straightforward and logical when we spell them out, but there's also still the possibility for the exploitation of customer data. There's increasing regulation happening in different countries and parts of the world, but still we see that gathering the data that social media, but also other actors on the digital marketplace get, that data is very, very valuable. Not only to sell things, not only to advertise things, but also, for instance, to have relevant addresses to contact people for whatever reason, or to do some market research. Suppose that I want to launch a new product, then it would be interesting to use data from social media to see what are kind of the preferences of people. What do they prefer? What do they like? What do they do not like? How does this differ per region? Maybe it differs according to gender, age group, whatever. This is super valuable information. So it might not be that you do not pay any subscription. It might not be that you see very many advertisements or that you see a lot of transactions happening. Then it still might be very interesting for companies to gather a lot of data and to analyze that and to charge a price for others than to use that data. Yeah. In those revenue models, is of course it's important to say that just as with those enterprise systems, those distinctions that I make, to a large extent, they're theoretical. They offer you the space, the possibilities that you have when doing, in this case, e-commerce. In reality, we see that sometimes combinations happen or that shifts happen throughout time. You have shops which are only pure play, so they are only online. You have shops or companies which basically have the combination, clicks and mortar, so they're both online and physical, or you have still companies which are only bricks and mortar, only physical. But you do see those evolutions throughout time. It used to be the case that Amazon was only a pure play, but they actually went to a clicks and mortar. And normally the direction is the other way around. And so you go for a bricks and mortar, a purely physical shop, and you add an online channel to it. Well, but sometimes, like with Amazon, we saw they started as a pure play, and then they also opened some real life shops. I think it's mostly in the United States, but still there they have some shops, and they opened it. So there are combinations, there are different ways of tackling it, and those different ways, they might also change throughout time. Yeah. With those advertisements, we see that now for a lot of those e-commerce platforms, those advertisements are really crucial. Alphabet, for Google, for instance, their main driver, Meta, the same, their main driver of revenues comes from advertisements. So those advertisements are crucial for them to generate revenue, and we see that there are tendencies that people, for instance, okay, they do not want that. So there used to be plugins in certain browsers that you could block advertisements. Or 1-2 years ago, Apple, which was one of the vendors, which sometimes claims that they are more concerned or that they take more into account privacy issues than their competitors. Well, they said, we will block ad tracking to make sure that your personal data is not tracked through means of cookies and whatever when you use our devices, which caused a lot of anger from their competitors, saying, well, you cannot do that because it's important that it happens, and for their business model, it is a crucial element to generate your revenues. So when I said in the first lecture, try to look or to follow a little bit the recent news in these digital industries. Well, in a lot of cases, you see messages that relate to those different typologies. Like you can see, but those companies are complaining because they are this kind of company, or their revenue model is this kind of revenue model, which explains a lot when you actually take a look at it. And then finally, so we had marketplaces, the role that you have within the marketplace. We had revenue models. How do you make money? And then you also have the commercial model. Once you know how you make money, how do you then determine your price? And also there we have different alternatives. You have the easiest one, which is a fixed price sales model, where you have a fixed price and there's no negotiation, there is no possibility to change, like you have in a normal retail shop. Here you go to the shop and the price is the price that is advertised. E-commerce makes it much easier to have these kind of other price models as well. You can go for brokered or negotiated deals, where if you bring together two sides of the market, customers, clients, and suppliers, well, you might have, for instance, on second-hand markets, it's much easier to have many people visiting the platform, doing their own offers and doing their own bids, and then to let the markets play. You can have an auction where you do not just only negotiate, but you actually do the auction. You have it open for a certain amount of time. You have bidders for the product or service, and you can have all types of variants, loyalty-based promotions, bundling of service and products, which can be facilitated by those e-commerce markets. So what might be interesting to do is that if you analyze a certain company, if you come across a certain company that uses e-commerce as part of its channels, to think about where they are in that continuum. Which marketplace position do they take? Are they a primary service provider or manufacturer? Are they an online retailer? Are they a reseller? Are they an information broker? What is the way how they generate their revenue? Is it through direct sales, advertisement, commissions? I don't know. What's their commercial model? How do they determine the price that they ask for certain things? Fixed, via negotiated deals, auctions, and so on. And so it might be interesting to look at those different companies, see what they do, actually investigate where do they position themselves in the market, how do they generate money, and how do they determine the amount of money that they charge. So for instance, during the exam, I might ask you, okay, I might explain to you what a company does, and I might ask you, okay, give me the position, the revenue model, the commercial model. Or I could give you a certain marketplace position and then ask you to explain it or give me an example of a company that uses this marketplace model. Yeah? So you can find many examples in the slides, also in the handbook, on internet, and so on. And then those categorizations, just as like the enterprise information systems categorizations, they offer you a little bit of more structured view to these phenomena. Yeah. We could even take it one step further, and we can say, well, e-commerce, on the one hand, it allows you to do the same as you did before, offer it online, but we could go one step further, where we see that these days also digital goods and digital products arise. Music, video, software, newspapers, and so on. Yeah, they can be shipped on a device, on a hardware device, or they can just be sold by transferring the medium. But you can also approach them in another way, because they're also, again, from an economic point of view, very, very remarkable. If you have a digital good, a music song, a video, a piece of software, in contrast with a piece of furniture or with a car or like a real physical product, almost all costs are involved in the first production element. So once, you need to put a lot of effort into creating the song or the video, but once that song or video is created, most production costs have occurred. If you have a video or a song and you want to sell it to one person or to 1 million persons, if you sell it in a digital way, there's almost no difference. The cost is the same whether you distribute it to one person, whether you make one digital copy or 1 million copies. The cost is just production cost. Whereas if you buy or if you make a piece of furniture or a car, you always have the components and the assembly and the logistics and so on. Here we don't have it. So the marginal cost, as they say in economics, the additional cost for creating an additional unit is close to zero. It's not zero, but it's close to zero. You just need to set up the platform. Storage, distribution, delivery costs, close to zero. And so that means that for certain industries that had a huge impact, but it also means that you can actually substantially change your business model, change your revenue model, change your commercial model. We see some initiatives on that side as well. We are not also here. We see a lot of evolutions, a lot of things happening. I think still some companies and industries are figuring out how they can deal with those digital goods. One of the first examples in the early days of the internet was this guy, Alex Hughes, who created basically he created an empty web page with 1 million pixels, and he divided them in chunks of 10,000 pixels, and he tried to sell them with a small, he tried to sell them to people who were interested, and they could put a picture there, whatever they wanted, and most of them, they then put a little bit of an advertisement. The guy was able to get up to get more than 1 million pounds, I think it was, just from this initiative. Purely digital good, and okay, he was one of the first ones to really realize that and to exploit that idea. But we see, for instance, that some digital worlds, some virtual worlds have been created. We had Second Life, we had Farmville. Now the metaverse is trying to create purely digital environments, and then in one way or the other to attach a commercial model to it. We saw more recently, it was very hyped, and now it has already mostly, I think, disappeared. These NFTs, non-fungible tokens, where you could get the ownership of something purely digital. I think, in Belgium, Wout van Aert is one of those cyclists, which was very well known, and he has a lot of victories. And then what they try to do is they try to sell certain victories. Here on the Champs-Élysées, he won a certain ride on the Champs-Élysées, and they tried to sell the ownership of that victory, and then apparently people are willing to pay for that, and you can actually have transactions. You can again sell it. So okay, it was very popular some time ago. Now you saw that it doesn't seem to be so popular anymore, but you see that this is just as that those chatbots to make e-commerce platforms more interactive is now very much changing. Also, those digital goods, it's not something that has stabilized. It's not something that has saturated yet. So a lot of companies are experimenting with that. Of course, needless to say, you can also not only shop from your laptop, you can also, of course, take it to your smartphone and so on. The only reason I mention it here is because of two reasons. First of all, also here we see that percentage of people actually buying stuff on their mobile phone or on their smartwatch even is steeply increasing. So again, this is not something that has been fully stabilized. It's exploding with growth figures of 20 and 30%. And it also requires, of course, a completely different way of designing your platform, of designing your website, because you need things like responsive design, making sure that your website is suitable for a desktop, but also for a laptop and for a tablet and for a smartphone, that you make sure that in each of those environments, on each of those devices, your website is easy to understand, easy to use, and very user-friendly. The benefits that it has is because, of course, by using an app, by using a mobile device, by using your smartwatch, you can try to solve a little bit the time gap between buying and the delivery, because you allow time critical purchases. If you know I need to buy something, you can actually do it on the road with your smartphone and not need to wait until you're home later that day, and the delivery can already start. It can be done everywhere. You can even have location-based transactions or location-based advertisements. So that is also very characteristic of that environment. Yes. Yes, of course. So the question was, is it possible for an e-commerce player to have multiple sources of revenue? Yes, for sure. As I said, these categorizations that I offer, they're a little bit theoretical in the sense that they allow you to make distinctions, to create a bit of structure. But of course, there are players who say, well, we both have advertisements, and we offer direct sales. I know that, for instance, in Belgium, you have lots of media companies, newspapers who used to be physical. Today, the amount of physical newspapers drops every year. And so most people, when they have a subscription to a newspaper, they do it online via their smartphone or via their laptop or whatever. And that's, for instance, something where people, they do pay for a subscription model, and they get still advertisements, because those are not free. And even there, you could see that also. I think, if I'm right, you saw companies like Netflix, where they used to start with a model, and they said, well, we're going to offer you streaming, and we're going to offer you media via this e-commerce model. And the nice thing is, you only pay a subscription, and then you're free of advertisement, which started to be as their unique selling point. And now they also have created a model where you pay a little bit less, but you get advertisements. And guess what? They're very, very personalized, because they know exactly what kind of series that you like. They know probably your age. They know your location. They know what kind of interest that you have. So they combine typical direct sales revenue model or subscription model, and they combine advertisement. So yes, for sure, you can combine it. And that's interesting to see how companies sometimes they shift, they combine. I think it's interesting. Yes. 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 Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Of course. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. 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 It's a very good question. It's a very interesting question. It's also a super difficult question, in a sense that, of course, I mean, the way that I presented here is meant to be neutral, in the sense that I do not judge it from a moral point of view. I mean, there are positive things, but there are negative things. I mean, this is more meant to be descriptive, in the sense that we describe a little bit the characteristics and the consequences. But this does not mean that all evolutions only have positive side effects. There might be negative side effects as well. That's for sure. Just as we basically see it with a lot of technologies, they might have very, very positive consequences. But at the same time, there might also be a drawback. There's also often there's often disruptive innovation, meaning that innovation happens and then new players stand up, and maybe new areas of the world profit more than other areas. And so, yeah, with innovation, often disruption comes. And that can be nice for people on the good side of the innovation, and can be less positive for other people or markets. So that is true, but it's also a little bit, yeah, that's unfortunately, I should say, that's one of the inherent consequences of innovation, certainly technological innovation. There are people who win with technology, and there are people sometimes who lose. Of course, as you rightfully say, how should we deal with it? Well, we should think about that. We should reflect upon that. It's not easy. There's an important role for governments there to indeed regulate it, which is part of the story. And you see that in a lot of industries, these regulations are there. For social media now, okay, there are privacy regulations that are there. There are moderation regulations which are there. But of course, governments and regulations and laws, they cannot solve everything. So part of it is also to make sure that you as a company, you as a country, you as a part of the world, that you remain competitive on those areas. So to make sure that you are able to use those technologies in an ethical way, and to make sure that you embrace them, and to make sure that you play along. But it's not easy. I mean, it's not easy to solve. There's not an easy one silver bullet solution to solve it, but it is very true. It's very factual to say that there are positive consequences and there are very bad consequences. There should be part of the regulation, which is, I think, already happening in several parts of the world. How to avoid that certain areas in the world lose with respect to other parts of the world, that's almost an impossible question to answer, in the sense that the only way to do it is try to regulate as good as possible, allow innovation, and make sure that you do not miss the train on those innovations. But unfortunately, I cannot give you an easy to apply solution to avoid those things. But it's very true indeed. This is just meant as a neutral, factual, descriptive overview, without having or making or even trying to make a moral judgment, because indeed there are positive and negative sides to this.